Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So, someone asked me to do this video, so I am going to be talking about perception. If you haven't seen the previous video that I've done on perception, and also a video or two I think I've done on labeling, you can check those out. They're similar yet different in certain ways, but you could also check out those videos. So today we're going to talk about perception, but what we're going to discuss is three stages, right, in the perception process. So we're going to go over look at specifically three stages in the perception process, right? We're going to talk about selection, and then we'll talk about organization, and then we will discuss interpretation. So we're looking at selection, and then we're looking at organization, and then we're looking at interpretation. Now, selection sounds really kind of like what it is, right? So let's kind of back up and think about what perception is. Perception is, at its very basic sense, it's the way that you look at something, right? So perception is the way you look at something. So what influences the way you look at something? And a lot of researchers, a lot of scholars will tell you that that has to do with culture. Culture plays a huge role in determining how you actually look at something. So culture plays a huge role in that. And then your individual experiences or lack of experiences, right? Unique situations that are unique to you have an impact on how you see the world, how you see other people, how you view certain types of things. So culture plays a huge role, and then your individual experiences as well, or lack of experiences also will play a huge role in terms of how you view something. So that's really what perception is at a very basic sense. So now we're going to talk about the three stages, right? Selection, organization, and then and interpretation. Those are the three stages that we're going to look at. So I made some notes as well that I'm going to reference as I go through. Some of these notes I use in teaching because I also teach. So I'm going to reference some of the notes that I have. So let's start with selection. As I said, that sounds exactly like it is. Before you make sense of anything, right? Before you come into contact with something, right? There is a selection process that actually takes place. So keep in mind that we are bombarded. We're just constantly bombarded with all types of events, life events, personal events, other events that are going on in our lives or around us, things in our community. You could be walking down the road and you're hearing music, you're seeing billboard signs, cars are passing by. Just all these different things that happen in our daily life. We're just constantly bombarded with all sorts of stuff. What makes us decide, though, to select a certain event or a certain person or a certain sound or a certain type of music or a certain, I mean, you name it, right? So what happens is, right, we are able to then, we hear something. I always use the example in class of you're walking down the hallway and you're hearing all these different people, they're talking, they're saying stuff. A lot of it has nothing to do with you, right? Until you hear something and you slow down because you give it your attention. So now you've selected out of all the images, out of all the conversations that are going on, you've selected something, a stimuli. So there's a stimuli in the environment, and the stimuli could be the something that someone was saying. It could be music, it could be something that's going on, there's an accident, there's whatever it is that catches you. That's the environmental stimuli. So there's a stimuli that catches your attention, right? And then now we want to turn that into some kind of experience, maybe a meaningful experience, right? Not always, but we might want to turn that into some kind of experience, or we've had some experience with the stimuli that catches our attention, And because of that, that's why we're standing up now and we're paying attention to what's going on. So I'm walking down the road, I'm walking through the hallways of the university campus or whatever the case is, and I'm just going by and I'm hearing people talking about all different types of things. But there's one thing that someone says, that one thing is the stimuli. And from the moment you do that, that's the selection process. Now, also, you have to ask yourself, why did I select this? Obviously it has to be something that you have some kind of interest in. It's either you have prior interest in it, it's something that you're somewhat familiar with, or and you're just trying to add to what you know already, or it's something that maybe you've never heard of it, and so maybe now you want to have some kind of meaningful experience with this thing, right, that you've never heard of. And so I'm going to listen more because I've never heard of this, or I've heard of it, but this is an interesting twist that this person is putting to it. So now I'm engaging in someone's conversation, maybe even if I wasn't invited. I'm kind of eavesdropping now because this is of interest to me, right? I'm trying to make now I am just listening. I'm just listening, right, to what they're saying, and I've decided to listen, right? That's the selection process. I've decided to listen because it's caught my attention. Now, why it caught your attention? All right, we could talk about that as we go on. All right, so the next part of it is the organizational phase. So now that it's caught your attention, right? Now that whatever they're talking about, some celebrity or some sports or some type of philosophy or whatever it is, now that it has caught your attention, there's something else that happens. Now, what we tend to do is the organizational phase is we put things into categories. So a lot of times the organizational phase is referred to as categorization, which means we're putting things into categories. That's how we make sense of stuff, right? So we're putting things into categories because that's how we make sense of stuff. So because we think about things a lot of times in clusters, which is why we also come up with stereotypes and all that kind of stuff, and that's not always good. But we put stuff into categories. We have patterns formed, and that we're able to quickly reference and remember things. That's kind of how the brain works, right? It's kind of natural for us to do certain things. So when you think of the organization is, think of it as simple as I'm putting this in my brain, and what I just heard or what I've just seen, and I'm adding it to all the other stuff that maybe are similar that I have in my brain, right? You're adding it. So I've selected it, and when I select it, if I'm going to quote unquote keep it, right? If you want to look at it as that, then I'm going to organize it in my brain, right? And it becomes part of the pattern of something similar that I have organized in my brain, right? And so I've collected all this information, and so that's why it's called the categorization stage. So I've got all of this. Remember, I've heard what someone said because I selected a conversation. I've organized it in my brain, maybe with something similar, most likely with something similar, right? Now I have to make sense of it, and that's the interpretation stage. And in the interpretation stage, a lot of times is where culture kicks in. That's the perception, right? So that's a lot of times where culture really kicks in terms of helping us to make sense of what we see, what we hear. So that's where culture kicks in, and that is in, let me reference my notes, that is in the interpretation stage, which is basically, what am I really seeing? What is this that is in front of me, right? And as I said, culture helps to really provide us with, I guess you could say it's like a perceptual lens. Culture helps to provide us with that perceptual lens that helps us to really understand what we're looking at. So let me give you an example. Some people, let me see if I can find something that's really, what does the police mean to certain people when certain people hear conversations about police? And this is very cultural, right? And also somewhat relevant in the times that we live in. When some people think of police, depending on, again, culture and all that, and they're selecting conversations about police, they're putting it, organizing all the stuff that they're hearing in their brains, right? What is the interpretation about police, right? In other words, how do I feel about police has a lot to do with the interactions that I've had with police, right? And the things that I've seen as it relates to the police, right? That sort of stuff. It's similar with relationships or anything like that. What is my past experience with certain types of relationships, or just relationships in general? And what conversations that I've come across that will help inform me as I am trying to make a decision about whether or not I should perhaps be in a relationship, right? And that's the interpretation stage. So in the interpretation stage, you're trying to make sense of what you've selected and organized. In the interpretation stage, you're trying to make sense of what you have selected and organized. And you could always get into, why did I select this anyway, right? You've heard of selective listening. Sometimes people would hear a whole lot of stuff and they only choose to, it's based on interest, right? And then they only choose to select certain things because we all have self-interest, right? So why do I select certain things, right? Why do I select certain things? Why does someone consistently date a certain type of people? You might hear someone say, I don't know how I always date these type of men or date these type of women, or whatever your situation is, right? Why is that you always date that type of person with that type of personality, right? And so that's your selection. There's something about them that attracts you to them, right? And in your own weird way, you have tried to rationalize that and then make some type of conclusion, all right? And based on whatever your interpretation process is, right? And what has influenced your interpretation process. So let me clarify that. There are people, believe it or not, because of their culture and because of how they were raised, they believe that men should have somewhat of a dominant role. I'm not saying that. Let me just clear that up, because I realize sometimes when people look at things, they hear what they want to hear, but they're not listening to what is being told. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what happens is, in some cultures, there are some women who, right, perceive their role, right, as being one that has to be submissive in a relationship. There are some men to this day in some cultures who see their role as having to be more dominant in a relationship. There's no such thing as them having equality or whatever in a relationship, right? That is their perception of what relationships are supposed to look like. Now, obviously, if you are dating someone from another culture, those are things that you have to take into consideration as well. So, look, that's probably something else I want to talk about moving on, but I want to stop there because this thing is so. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and if you could tell, I could keep going and going and going and going. But just know that the three stages of the perception process is you're selecting. I always like to say, why are you selecting that, right? Why are you selecting that? What makes you select that, right? But you're selecting, you're organizing, and then you're interpreting. And of course, the interpretation stage is, why do I see things the way I see it? Why do I see myself the way I see myself, right? And that's where the cultural lens comes in, right? That's what culture helps us to make sense of certain things, because we see what other people within our culture a lot of times are doing, and then we follow suit. And that's where also individual experiences and differences come in, because it's up to you a lot of times to be able to chart your own course, chart your own destiny, or whatever the case is. So anyway, I think I've said enough about that. So let me know, how do you perhaps view the perception process? What's your spin on the perception process? I probably said way more than I needed to say, but what's your spin on the perception process, right? Drop that in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to turn on your post notifications. Don't forget to hit the share. Don't forget to share and hit the like button. Those two things help the channel grow. And until next time, peace.